Hello and welcome to the 7.3 Reading Guide, Lesson 3, Society in the Roman Republic. I need to add the pages up there now, I see. Alright, like other ancient societies, Rome was divided by gender and class. Men and women had their own social roles, and the lives of wealthy Romans were very different from the lives of poor Romans and slaves. You got two separate issues going on here. First of all, incorrect spelling there. There's two separate issues here. Number one, the gender bias that took place in ancient Rome between men and women, a purely patriarchal society in which women really weren't offered the same kind of rights that they're offered today. And then you've got the whole gap between the rich and the poor, the patricians and the plebeians, and then a lower group, which are the slaves, who had absolutely no rights at all. What is a patriarchal society? It is a society that the Romans had. It was where men ruled their families and people traced their origins through their male ancestors. So basically, it went through the male bloodline. The paterfamilias is the oldest male in the Roman family, so that would be the oldest male that you would have, even in your extended family. So it would be grandfather, great-grandfather, great-uncle, uncle, and whoever the oldest male is in your family would be considered the paterfamilias. And he pretty much was in charge. He owned all the family's property, had absolute power over wife, children, slaves, even his underage siblings. So, like say your great uncle, if he's older than your grandfather, would be the paterfamilias until he kicks a bucket, and then your grandfather would become, and it would be a paternal grandfather on your father's side would become the paterfamilias, so your family. It also mentions that the paterfamilias can kill any member of the family if he chooses, but that was limited by social customs, which basically means that it really didn't happen, although the right and the privilege was there if the paterfamilias wanted to do that. This is a little bit different from Hispanic society. I know that some of our students that have been from Mexico that came to the United States and ended up in Fox Chapel have multiple hyphenated last names, and what they do is, and I think it's pretty cool, they drag along the mother's maiden name in their with their full name. So they usually will hyphenate or have a middle name as one of the mothers, their mother's maiden name, which ends up dragging along the mom's family line with them. And we did that with one of our kids. We had the middle name is Mrs. Ashbaw's maiden name, so it was a way for us to pull her family name along with one of our kids. And many of you, if you do have mother's maiden name as your middle name, that's what your parents were trying to do as well. Rights and privileges, we just talked about. Okay, many Roman fathers felt that doing one's duty to their families was one of the highest Roman honors and virtues, and this duty also included honoring their ancestors and continuing the family name through sons. The sons were obviously very important because of this patriarchal, status. Having males were the most important things to these people. How are the Roman women unlike most Greek women? Well, the Roman women did have more freedoms. Although they were not allowed to take part in politics, they did have an active role in social life. They could go to parties, theaters, religious rituals. They actually could make wills, divorce their husbands, and go out alone in public. But they did not have the right to hold public office, as you can see with number 7 here. Although rich wives and mothers would sometimes influence public decisions through their husbands and sons, they still weren't able to vote to be part of any of the assemblies or hold any public office. Most Romans, around 90% were poor free people or people who were enslaved, a very tiny minority. Somewhere between 5 to 10% would be considered the wealthy elite. How did the wealthy earn their money? This is just like, today, folks. The more land you have, usually the more money you have. Land is value in the ancient world, and it's value even today. And so that's where many Romans made their money, through these huge agricultural plantations that were called latifundias, and then some were successful through business ventures. An upper-class Roman home, this should probably say within the city, because this is in the actual city of Rome itself. It was a 1- or 2-story house as large as a city block, had courtyards, gardens, private baths, beautiful decorations inside, and actually were connected to the aqueducts, which we'll talk about later on in this chapter, which they were pipes that were bringing water to the city. There were thousands of aqueducts in ancient Rome, and actually there are still some that are in use and that are functioning in the modern city of Rome that are over 2,000 years old, which is just unbelievable in my opinion. Those are used for fountains today, not really used for drinking water, but these homes were called domus, D-O-M-U-S. One of them was called a domus. Plural, I believe, was domi, D-O-M-I-I. And we'll look more at them when we look at the paradex slides on Thursday. Yeah, right after we do this reading guide. Okay, many elite Roman families also owned villas. Those were outside the city. They would go, these were like their vacation homes, and they were in the countryside. So they're two luxurious places to live, one within the city, and then the other one is like, you know, camp or whatever, which would be outside the city. Beautiful, large estates. What were the houses like for the Roman poor? Exactly the opposite. They were these large, cramped apartment buildings called insulae, I-N-S-U-L-A-E, with no running water. They could be up to 7 stories high. People that lived in the insulae faced crime, disease, fire, were all big, serious dangers. There was no organized fire department yet, and once one of these suckers caught on fire, it pretty much burned straight to the ground. And if you lived on the 7th floor, you were in a lot of trouble. Also, the apartments were poorly constructed, and they were very prone to collapse. Again, if you're on the 7th floor where the rent is the cheapest, during a collapse you would not be in good shape. What were some of the jobs for the common Roman men and women? Men and women were tenant farmers who rented the land from wealthy landowners, day laborers in construction or worked on the docks, and then some ran stores, taverns, restaurants. Slavery became a really hot commodity as the time turned over from BC or BCE to CE, right around 1 BCE before the turnover. Many people were enslaved by the Romans. Around 40% is believed to be in the city of Rome, so almost half the population considered to be slaves. What are some examples of some unfortunate things that could happen to a slave in Roman society? First of all, no rights. It could be bought and sold as property. They could be beaten or killed by their masters for any reason whatsoever. Children born to slaves were also considered slaves. Many were worked very hard in the mines and also on large farms, sometimes even worked to the death, and they often died quickly. They did not live very long lives due to this brutal treatment. There were some slaves that lived easier lives, and basically they were the ones that were educated. Usually they were Greeks, left over from Alexander's empire. They worked in the homes of the rich, sometimes as secretaries, and a lot of times they worked as tutors, because if you had this valuable skill that you were educated, you could read and write and teach, you know, it'd be a waste to shove you into a mine somewhere, you know, and have you die at age 30. So a lot of rich families would pick up these educated slaves and make them work in the homes. Sometimes these people were actually treated very well, almost like family. Enslaved people who served loyally actually could be freed as a reward. They could also save up to buy their freedom, and once they became free, they became citizens and had the right to vote. I love this guy. I've seen numerous movies about him, and I've also watched a couple series about him. His name is Spartacus. That is not his real name. He was a Greek soldier who was captured by the Roman troops and was forced to become a gladiator. And then he escaped and led an army of rebel slaves around the 70 BCE range. And he was an excellent military tactician. He smashed the Romans wherever he fought them. You know, the Romans were idiots if you think about it. They trained these people to be killing machines. They trained them to be these gladiators to fight for pleasure in the arena. They never thought what would happen if a bunch of them got loose and, you know, used their training against the Roman people themselves. And they did. The Romans couldn't beat them. They'd send out legions and legions of, you know, well-trained soldiers, and they would never come back. And really, we'll talk a lot more about Spartacus tomorrow after you watch this video. But you know, the only thing that brought him down really was he would not abandon the women and children and the men that weren't of fighting age, you know, old men. Had he left them when he liberated these huge plantations, I think he could have been successful. But these old men, women, and children weren't mobile enough, and the Roman army was a professional army, and that ended up leading to Spartacus's downfall. We're going to listen to a podcast on him. A really smart guy. Just, you know, a big mistake that he made to you know, lug around these extra people. But, you know, really, if you think about it, it's a moral dilemma. If he leaves these people on the plantations, you know, they're probably going to be executed or mistreated anyway. And he felt this, you know, need to be able to liberate as many slaves as he could. I think his army got as big as 40,000 at one point. Wait till you hear what happened to Spartacus and his men once the Romans captured him. Bad stuff. Really bad stuff. How did religion influence everyday life in ancient Rome? It was an important part of everyday life. Families had altars in their homes. Not only did they have animal sacrifices in their own private homes, but also at public events. Religion was a big part of their lives. From where did the Romans adapt their gods? And most all of you know this at this point. They got most of their gods from the Greeks. All they did was rename them. They actually had the same roles, and they were in charge of the same things. They just ended up renaming them. A lot of these gods ended up becoming names of the planets in our solar system. Also, the Etruscans, they borrowed some gods from them and conquered people, but they were a polytheistic people with hundreds of gods. What is an established religion? Well, it's a religion that's officially supported by the government. Government officials served as priests, and anytime a large government decision would be made, they would consult the priests to decide if this was something that the gods wanted them to do or not. It's funny because the established religion was Roman polytheism in the beginning of the Roman Republic. Then Christianity became prevalent. It was actually persecuted. Christians were persecuted against, and then eventually Christianity was allowed, and then it actually became the established religion. So, they went from trying to kill every Christian they could find to 200 years later, the emperor converted to Christianity, and another 100 years after that, people were actually persecuted against that weren't Christian. So that's more to come on that at a later date. All right, Rome was home. The Jewish people were already around well before the Roman Empire was established, so Rome was already home to thousands of Jews, and actually Judaism was recognized as an official religion by Julius Caesar, which is an interesting accomplishment of his. The Romans tried to placate their gods or keep them happy. Placate's a good word to put into your mental vocabulary. You should try that with your parents. Your parents ask you to take out the garbage or something like that. Say, well, mother, I'd love to placate you, so I will do that for you, and then your mom will think you're the smartest person in the world and give you money or something like that. What did they do to honor their gods? They prayed, worshipped in home, built temples, animal sacrifices, and held games. That should say held, not help. As you notice, it's the first time I'm making all these documents because of the new textbook. And many of these games not only would be athletic events, but also they'd be gladiatorial games in which human beings would kill each other for the entertainment of other human beings. More to come on that. Finally, we've heard a lot about our friend Marcus Tullius Cicero, and Cicero has yet another famous quote. He says, "I am quite certain that Rome would never have been able to be so great had not the immortal gods been placated." Remember, placate means to keep the gods happy. So what Cicero's saying here is he's saying that Rome would never have become what it was unless the people were a religious type and honored their gods. That's the reason for the success of the Romans. All right, well, I want to thank you for watching this Edpuzzle video.